All right, hey everyone, welcome back. It's time for another deep dive. Today, we're tackling a topic that's pretty much guaranteed to pop up on the UPSC mains exam, and probably prelims too, and that's India's energy strategy. We're going deep on this one, folks. We're using some great recent reports from the Hindu and the Economic Times to really try to break this down. And, India's goal is energy independence, but when you consider that 85% of their crude oil is imported right now, well, the path forward, it's a little how do I say this? It's complicated, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's a big challenge, and there's a lot of moving parts to keep in mind. To really grasp what's going on, you got to think beyond just simple supply and demand. India's got this really complex, multifaceted approach to how they're engaging in the whole global energy scene.
Okay, so let's dive right in. Let's start with something that's been making headlines. India is increasing their energy purchases from the U.S. We're talking a potential $25 billion soon, up from $15 billion. That's a huge jump. What's the strategy there?
Well, one big factor is diversification. You see, when a country relies too heavily on just one supplier, it makes them vulnerable. So by partnering with the U.S., India is not just getting more energy, but they're also spreading the risk, if you will, and reducing their dependence on those traditional suppliers. This is, kind of a classic move in international relations, something UPSC loves to test on.
So it's not just about keeping the lights on. It's about geopolitics, too.
Exactly, yeah. And there's another really interesting layer to this. The U.S. wants to be a top global LNG exporter, liquefied natural gas. And we've already seen their crude oil exports to India almost double in the past year. This could be a sign of things to come.
Okay, wait, hold on. I know LNG is a big deal, but can you give us a quick breakdown? Why is it so important for India's energy, the future of their energy?
Sure, so it all boils down to natural gas. India's demand for natural gas is going to explode in the coming years. Think 103 billion cubic meters each year by 2030. Whoa, that's a lot, right?
That's like adding the entire gas consumption of a whole another country.
It is, yeah. And even with India ramping up their own domestic production, they're still going to need to import tons of LNG to meet that demand. That's where the global market comes in.
Got it. So India is becoming a big player in this global LNG game. What does that mean? What are the implications?
Well, it gives them leverage, right? If you're a major buyer, you can negotiate better deals. You might even be able to influence LNG prices globally. But of course, there are also risks. Competition for this resource is only going to heat up.
And of course, we can't talk about global energy without talking about, well, Russia. Since the whole Ukraine war, Russia's become a key oil supplier to India, offering some pretty good deals too, especially while facing sanctions.
Yeah, it's been a major shift. I mean, think about this. India went from getting less than 1% of its oil from Russia to a crazy 40% in just, no time. It's a really clear example of how global events can completely reshape energy markets and create both opportunities and challenges for countries like India.
It really makes you wonder how this is all going to impact India's relationship with the U.S., especially since the U.S. wants to be a key energy partner for them. Could this cause some friction?
Oh, for sure. It's a balancing act for India. They need reliable and affordable energy, but they also need to manage these complex geopolitical relationships. This is like textbook international relations and economics, right? The kind of stuff UPSC examiners really want you to understand.
So we've got the U.S., Russia, and this whole LNG market in play. But what about India's own domestic energy production? They're not just relying on imports, right?
Definitely not. India's putting a lot of effort into increasing their oil and gas production within their own borders. But even with that, they're not going to be able to meet all of their energy needs just from what they produce themselves.
So imports are key, but it also sounds like India is trying to, not depend so much on those imports by looking at other energy sources, yeah?
You're on the right track. India is really investing in renewables like ethanol and biofuels. Plus, they're supporting electric vehicles and building charging stations. It all ties into their bigger sustainability goals, which is another hot topic for UPSC.
So it's like they're diversifying their energy portfolio, hitting it from all angles.
Precisely. And that's what makes this whole topic so fascinating. It's relevant for your UPSC prep, because India's energy strategy is this mix of international relations, economic sustainability, and tech innovation. It's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack. But hey, that's what we're here for. By the way, if you're liking this deep dive so far, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And please, drop your thoughts or questions in the comments below. We love hearing from you. And of course, if you want to go even deeper, the full reports are in the Hindu and the Economic Times. Now, before we jump into the specifics of India's domestic energy production in part two, we got a question.
Go for it.
Okay, so we're seeing how intertwined all these global energy markets are, right?
Yeah.
And India's actions can have a big impact. What do you think could be the biggest unintended consequence of their energy strategy, something they maybe didn't plan for?
Oh, that is a great question. That deserves some real thought, doesn't it? We'll definitely come back to that later on in our deep dive. But for now, let's shift our focus to what's happening within India's borders.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Let's shift gears a little bit and zoom in on what's happening within India's border, their domestic energy scene.
It's really interesting, isn't it, how India is trying to balance securing energy globally while also becoming more self-reliant at home. It's like a two-pronged approach.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And a big piece of that self-reliance puzzle is boosting their own oil and gas production. Remember that huge natural gas demand we talked about, reaching 103 billion cubic meters every year by 2030?
Oh yeah, that number is still hard to grasp. It's massive.
For sure. And even if their domestic production hits almost 38 billion cubic meters by 2030, that still leaves a pretty big gap to fill. Right. Which brings us back to that global LNG market and why it's so important. But what else is India doing, domestically to diversify their energy mix? I mean, they're not just sticking with fossil fuels, are they?
Great question, and you're right on the money. That's something UPSC examiners love to see, that awareness of the bigger picture. So India is exploring alternative energy solutions, especially when it comes to biofuels.
Okay, so what are we talking about here? Give us the rundown for our future exam takers.
So the main players are ethanol and compressed biogas. They're renewable, they're sustainable, and they can really help reduce India's reliance on imported crude oil. It's like a win-win situation, the kind of thing you often see discussed in public policy.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Smart move for their energy security and for the environment.
Exactly. And that link to India's commitment to cleaner energy is something to keep in mind for anyone tackling UPSC questions on environmental policy. They're also putting a lot of effort into building electric vehicle charging infrastructure.
Wow, that's huge. Think about it. If India could transition a good chunk of their transportation over to electric vehicles, it'd be a game changer, not just for their energy, but for air quality and their climate goals, too.
No doubt, it's a big goal with big challenges, but the potential benefits are enormous.
Okay, so we've got this push for domestic production, exploring these alternative fuels and developing electric vehicle infrastructure. But can we circle back to that big increase in oil imports from Russia for a second? I am still kind of processing how quickly that happened.
It's a prime example of how one global event can just trigger a chain reaction across energy markets, international relations. And it raises a really important question for those prepping for the UPSC exams. How will this affect India's foreign policy?
That's what I keep thinking about. It's like they're walking a tightrope, trying to get affordable energy, but also manage all these, these delicate geopolitical relationships.
For sure. India needs to stay on good terms with major players like the U.S., but they also need to take advantage of opportunities that come up, like the current situation with Russia. It's a tough balancing act that requires a deep understanding of both international relations and economics.
I can already see this as an essay question on India's foreign policy or energy security. What do you think is the most important takeaway for our listeners here?
I think the key is understanding how everything is connected. Domestic energy production, alternative fuels, those imports from Russia, partnerships with the U.S., India's sustainability goals, and their overall foreign policy, it's all part of the same puzzle.
It's not just about memorizing facts. It's about seeing the bigger picture and how it all fits together.
Right, and that's a skill that'll help you not only on the UPSC exams, but really in any career path you choose.
But to do well on those exams, our listeners need to be able to analyze these trends, understand the major players, and figure out what India's actions could mean on a global level. You got it.
And speaking of the global stage, there's one more crucial piece of this energy puzzle we need to look at: the dynamics of the global LNG market and what it means for India moving forward. We'll pick up there in part 3 of our deep dive.
Stay tuned, everyone, for the final part of our analysis. We'll untangle the complexities of the global LNG market and see how India is positioning themselves in this constantly changing landscape. And hey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment with your thoughts or questions. We love hearing from you.
All right, welcome back, everyone, for the final part of our deep dive into India's energy strategy. We've talked about a lot, from those strategic partnerships with other countries to India's own efforts to increase production and look at alternative fuels. But now we're getting to something that's absolutely crucial for understanding where India's energy future is headed: the global LNG market.
You're right. It's a market that's always changing. You've got geopolitical events, tech advancements, all sorts of things influencing it. And like we've been saying, India's need for natural gas is only going up, so they're going to be a major player in this market.
Okay, so set the scene for us. What does it actually look like, India becoming more and more involved in this global LNG market?
Well, picture this global network of suppliers and buyers, right? Everyone's trying to get their hands on this valuable resource. As India's demand increases, they're going to be negotiating these huge import deals, competing with other countries for shipments, and maybe even having a say in how global LNG prices are set.
It sounds like a pretty high-stakes game with a lot riding on it for India's energy security.
You got it. And it's a game where knowing the players and how everything works is super important. Take the U.S., for example. They're aiming to be one of the top LNG suppliers to India, but they're facing competition from other big exporters out there.
And then there's Russia. What happens if those sanctions are lifted and Europe starts buying more Russian gas again? How would that affect India's plans?
That's a really interesting scenario. It could totally change the whole global LNG market. If Europe's demand goes up, the U.S. might have to look for new markets like India to stay competitive. That could mean better deals for India, but it also shows how unpredictable this market can be.
So it's not just about getting enough LNG. It's about dealing with these global political shifts and being ready for anything, right?
Absolutely. And that's why this is such a valuable topic for UPSC aspirants. It really challenges you to analyze global trends, understand those economic forces at play, and assess the geopolitical risks.
It's about connecting the dots, seeing the bigger picture. And that brings us back to a key takeaway from our whole deep dive into India's energy strategy.
I agree. It's not just about memorizing facts. It's about understanding the underlying factors, how everything is connected.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And for our listeners prepping for the UPSC exams, I think the main message here is don't just focus on the facts. Try to really grasp the dynamics at play, how all these different aspects of the energy sector are intertwined.
Well said. India's energy strategy is like a microcosm of the challenges and opportunities facing the entire world today. By studying it, you're not just prepping for an exam, you're developing a way of thinking about global issues that will help you throughout your career no matter what path you choose.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with one final thought to consider. India's need for energy is only going to grow. What kinds of innovations or strategies do you think will be most important for shaping their energy landscape over the next decade? What's going to be the game changer?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We always love hearing from our listeners.
And if you're looking for more details on this topic, definitely check out the full reports in the Hindu and the Economic Times. And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into current events that are relevant to your UPSC journey. Until next time, keep learning, keep those brains buzzing, and best of luck with your preparation.